Thanks, everyone, for being here. I'm Bill Williams. I'm the U.S. Attorney for the District of Oregon, and I just really appreciate all the effort that's gone into bringing this gathering together and the work by the FBI and the Secretary of State's office and our office. I can't think of a more timely discussion, given that we're entering the 2020 election cycle and how important the entire reason for elections sort of solidifies for me what is so important that we draw recognition to and appreciation for being citizens of the United States, and that is the right and ability to vote. I can't think of a more important right and opportunity that we all have as citizens to vote in national and state elections. And we are here to have an important discussion about why it's so important to protect those votes. They matter. When we're filling out our mail-in ballot or in other states going into the ballot box or booth, I've always felt like it's a treasure that we need to protect. And from the time I became eligible to vote, I just thought it was just the neatest thing. And it's not just because I had a really good high school history teacher, which I did, but each one of those votes count. So that's why we're here. For those of you who are candidates in the room, congratulations on your candidacies and for having the courage to run for something you believe in. I've always felt that folks who have that courage are pretty special. Doesn't matter what your beliefs are, what your political bent might be. The fact that you have the courage to put yourself out there and run and speak to and work for those things you believe in is pretty phenomenal. So thank you for taking those real, tangible steps towards making our communities and our state safer, fairer, healthier, stronger, and quite frankly, just more just. For the elections officials in the room, thank you for your public service. You are on the front lines of protecting these rights that we treasure in administering, I think, again, one of the most sacred aspects of being Americans. And we know that you have a tremendous responsibility. It takes a lot of courage and resolve to do what you do, especially in today's, polarized state of affairs that it seems like we're in. I think we can all agree that protecting our nation's democratic processes, including elections, certainly for us with the Department of Justice, is among the United States Department of Justice top national priorities. I've been on numerous phone calls in recent weeks about a number of national priorities, and this is one of them, from Attorney General Barr through Deputy Attorney General Rosen. Malign foreign influence operations targeting our elections and electoral process are among the most pressing threats our nation faces. The Justice Department, including the FBI, plays an important role in investigating and disrupting these activities and others that threaten our national security. We do this in a number of ways. Like any other type of federal crime, the FBI pursues tips and leads to identify, investigate, and disrupt illegal foreign influence activity. The Bureau then works with our office, the U.S. Attorney's offices around the United States, and main Justice Department components to evaluate if and when federal charges are warranted. Foreign influence campaigns can violate several federal criminal statutes, including the Foreign Agents Registration Act, also known as FARA. The Justice Department's investigations support not only our pursuit of criminal charges, but also other actions of the United States government. These may include various diplomatic, intelligence, military, and economic responses. We do our best, when appropriate, to share the information we gather through our investigations to alert targets of influence operations and the general public. The targets could be individual campaigns. interest groups, or public entities. In some circumstances, malign influence operations can be rendered less effective by educating the public. I can't think of a more important task that we have for all of you in the room and all of us just as citizens to be paying attention to the efforts that are going on trying to influence us. And that's why I think one of our most important responsibilities and the reasons we're here today is to assist folks like you and election officials and candidates to increase your resilience and ability to recognize and combat malign influence. Our goal this evening is to provide you steps that each of you can take to mitigate threats you might receive throughout this election season and beyond. It's important to note, however, that our efforts here are proactive attempts to mitigate threats. They are not responsive of any known threats to Oregon-based groups, officials, or elections. I want to reemphasize that. In delivering this training, we are mindful that the state of Oregon and its localities are responsible for administrating federal elections under Article 1, Section 4 of the United States Constitution. We are committed to supporting elections across Oregon. We can all agree that Oregonians should have the confidence in their election officials. Secretary Clarno, Director Trout, and others work tirelessly to ensure security and fairness of elections throughout the state. I can tell you, standing up yesterday at a press conference about this seminar with Director Trout yesterday was a real treat that Ren and I didn't have to answer many questions because Director Trout had them and a very informative and effective way handled a lot of questions, and we greatly appreciated that. Our goal here tonight is simply to help and to offer collective knowledge and expertise so these campaigns and officials are better equipped for the task at hand. The nature of malign foreign influence operations will continue to change as technology and our adversaries' tactics evolve. One thing is certain, these threats will persist. You can count on it. They will continue trying to exploit a process inherent to what it means to be an American, and that's our electoral process. The Justice Department plays an important role in combating these interference attempts, but at the same time, we cannot and should not attempt to address this problem alone. It's like everything else that Ren and I and others and anybody who's ever worked in or been a part of law enforcement, either in the state of Oregon or on a national level, we don't get anything done without partnerships with our federal, state, local, and tribal partners. The same is true for this topic. So it takes a whole community to effectively respond and be aware of what we're looking at. Again, all our federal, state, and local partners. I just want to thank all of the organizations again who've partnered to make tonight's briefing possible. And I'll end with just noting again, this is an important issue. I think it's fair to say all of you in the room, I believe, share my view of the importance and power of the voting process and our votes as Americans. So thank you for being here. And it's my great pleasure to ask Secretary Clarno to come on up.
Thank you, Bill. I would like to thank the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office for working together with my team to put on this important event. It is going to take all of us working together to protect the integrity of the 2020 elections. Partnerships is the key. Tonight, we have government representatives from counties, the state, and our federal government. Oregon has a dedicated team to help secure our elections that consists of members of our Elections Division, Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, Federal Bureau of Investigations, the Oregon National Guard, the Oregon Office of Emergency Management, and the Cybersecurity Services section of the Oregon Chief Information Security Officer's Office. I dare anyone to say that faster. This team, working together with county elections officials, is more coordinated and works better together than it ever has before. Having all levels of government working together is important. It gives us, and certainly me, the confidence to know that all of these different agencies are working together to defend and secure our democracy. I thank you all for your public service and commitment to our elections. Even with all of these coordinated efforts and resources and tools, every one of us individually, as informed voters, are the best defense we have against attacks on our democracy. Make sure you have strong passwords and be careful which links you click on. And most importantly, don't be fooled by misinformation and don't spread it. It's great to have all of these experts here in Oregon to help us, and hope that we will all learn things tonight that will help you and all of us be able to better protect your systems and our campaigns. And next we will hear from our elections director for the Secretary of State's office, Mr. Steve Trout.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. It's great to be here. What a great crowd. What an important topic. And I just want to share a little bit of what we've been doing at the state to help to protect elections. Just a little over 3 years ago, when elections were declared critical infrastructure, I didn't know most of the partners that are now part of our Tiger team that the Secretary just talked about. It's such a comforting feeling knowing that all of these resources are here, working together, working with the same purpose, and there's so many resources that the federal government can bring to help us at the state. And as the Secretary mentioned, it takes state, county, and federal working together to be able to combat these threats. The more I learn about security, cybersecurity especially, the more I realize how interconnected all things are. And this isn't just, all right, we've got this elections box and we're going to secure it, because it's tied to the power grid, to the communications, to other county resources, communications. And so all of this is, it just branches out and touches a lot of things. And so, I'm a lawyer by training. I never thought I was going to have to become a cybersecurity person that could talk about these things. I'm still not an expert on it, but I've learned a lot over the last few years, and I think I'm really excited for tonight. From 2017 leading up until the 2018 election, I think there was a lot of focus on getting state election offices and officials up to speed on what the threats were and what the tools were to combat those. After the 2018 election, we recognized that we need to start, really spreading this out to the county level election officials, and I think we've done that. We've spent some time, addressing that, and one of those things we had. All 36 of our Oregon counties are members of what's called the EISAC. And that's the Elections Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center. And so what that does is it gives pretty much 24/7 monitoring of any issues that would come up as far as threats to our elections. And it's important because having all 36 counties on board, we're all getting that same information and there's no gaps. And as we talk about different attacks and different threats, it only takes one gap to be able to allow somebody entry. And so having all 36 counties, I think is important for us. It shows that we're engaged. We're trying to get all the information we can to be able to identify all of the threats. And so we kind of took that, and in August at the county clerk's annual conference, we partnered with the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, and they really helped us to customize a tabletop exercise focused on the way we do elections in Oregon, vote by mail, to be able to identify things that we needed to be prepared for. What if our website goes down? What if somebody blows up a ballot drop box? What if the voter registration system is inaccessible? What if the phones don't work? What if you can't get in contact with your county clerk? And so we developed a scenario and worked through that, and that helped us to identify areas where we had strengths, identify areas where we needed improvement. We were able to talk about it at a session this morning to see kind of the progress that we've made, because we had an after action item review that we went through. We're able to identify some things that we've really improved over the last 6 months, some things that we need to continue to work on. Security is never something that we're going to finish. We're going to continue to have to move forward, identify new threats, continue to work together. And so that's why I'm so excited to, be a member of this Tiger team. And not just that, but not only do I know them now, but I'm in contact with them frequently. I can call their cell phone at any time. I know who has the best resources for whatever the threat is, and, been able to confirm that they're there. They have our backs. They're great partners, and they're as committed to defending democracy as we are at the Secretary of State's office. And I thank you for that. So one of the things that is really important is we've got our protective security advisor that's going out to each of the 36 counties to identify threats. We can't really decide or know what we need to do to defend our systems until we really have an idea of what our most vulnerable threats are, and so that we can start to identify those and prioritize those to be able to go forward and ask the legislature or ask Congress or whoever for funding to help to alleviate some of those risks. And that's helping us to know, again, where we're in good shape and where we need to do some work. And so, it's never fun to go in and have somebody come in and evaluate you to see, where your weaknesses are. But our PSA has done a great job of going in a non-threatening way to work together in partnership with those county clerks and their offices to assess what's really vital and critical from a perspective of, if I was a bad guy trying to break in, this is what I would do. And so that helps us to be able to be prepared and to take measures to mitigate those risks. So I'm going to say that, I think all of this partnership, all of these new resources, all of this new understanding is great. As I told the county clerks this morning, compared to where we were 3 years ago, I mean, we've just jumped light years and have a greater understanding of what we need to do. Our systems are more secure. They gave me a little bit of a bad time this morning because I've been sending phishing attempts to them, trying to get them to click on a link, and I caught some of them. The second time around, I didn't catch as many, so that's progress. And so we had a little discussion today about if they're ever going to trust an email from me again. And a number of them said no, and I said, well, then I've been successful. But figuring out how to communicate in a world where people are trying to break into our, get us to click on things so that they can gain entry is something that's only going to increase, and that we have to take protections against. So even with all of the cyber threats and physical security threats, the biggest threat to our elections is misinformation and disinformation. And so that's the real challenge that we take. That's a lot harder to prevent. That's a lot harder to anticipate and to combat. But as the Secretary said, that's something I think we all need to be able to do. It was mentioned about the the press conference yesterday. And so it was interesting knowing what was said and then what was reported. And I just want to share, I want to make sure I quote this right because I think this is a good example. So the very first line of this story, Salem, on the heels of fresh voting system failures in Iowa. So we didn't talk anything about voting system failures, but that was the news. There were no voting system failures in Iowa. There were no voting systems in Iowa. It's a caucus. They gather in the corner and count each other. And yet that was the lead sentence in a story about a press conference about tonight. And so that doesn't help. And I understand that, sensationalism, you're wanting to get clicks, but that doesn't help to say that there were voting system failures in a story about this event. And so we all need to just be aware and not fall into the trap of clicking on that or believing that. And that's easier said than done, but we really want to be the trusted source. And so, those of you that are candidates, political parties, if you have any questions about what's going on or concerns about the process, please call us. Please call the county election officials, many of whom are in the room. We're going to be straight up with you. We want to help you to understand the process. There's going to be a lot of misinformation out there, and it's hard not to be, we're not going to be able to combat all of that. And so with that, I want to say, for those of you that are in the room that are candidates, those that are watching this later, thank you for your willingness to go forward and serve. It's not easy, it's hard, and we need more people doing it. But that said, in November, over 50% of you are not going to win. And that's not because of any hacking, that's not because of any improprieties or attacks on the integrity of the election. It's just because of the math and the number of people running for a contest. And so, it's kind of funny, but we see it all the time. We're going to put a cloud over the election because I didn't win. And I'm going to, I fell victim to this myself. About 15 years ago, I ran for the school board. And so, polls closed. I go online to check the results, and I was in second place. And this was in California. In California, they rotate the order of the candidate names on the ballot. And so it's like, when I marked myself on my ballot, I did vote for myself. I was on the bottom line, and yet the election results, I'm in the middle line. So they must have just got those flip-flopped. And that lasted 1 second, and I slapped myself, and it's like, come on, Steve, you know better than this. Don't question that. But I get it. You work hard. You're passionate about it. That's why you're running for office. You invest time and money, and you want to win. That's why you're running. And it's hard to accept those numbers. And so I understand it. But I think in elections today, there's a lot of people looking to blame the system or blame the process when it's just a matter of math. So again, I applaud anyone that's willing to put their neck out and run for office. I just hope that you'll recognize that, especially here in Oregon, we run a tight ship elections-wise, and you can have confidence that what gets reported is accurate. And if there's a problem with the systems, we're going to be transparent about it and let you know. So finally, thanks to CCTV for filming this tonight. There's a number of handouts out there. We know there's a number of people that are going to be watching this after the fact. All of the materials that are here, all of the videos and other resources we have there already, OregonVotes.gov/security. We'll have those there as soon as they're available, probably in the next week or two. And encourage you again, if you've got any questions or concerns about the election process, about election integrity, about what we're doing, please contact us. We don't, we want to share that. We're proud of the work we're doing. I'm proud of the work the county clerks do in each of the election offices. We like to tell our story, but mostly we like to get elections accurate. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Bill Burgess. He's the current president of the Oregon Association of County Clerks and the current county clerk for Marion County, where we stand It's where I stand tonight. Bill.
Welcome. It's so neat to see everybody here in our hometown of Salem. We like to call it Salem, the capital city, the end of the Oregon, or the Eden at the end of the Oregon Trail. We're not the end of the Oregon Trail, but we're the Eden. We're the greenest part, the nicest part, the part, even though some people will, I know some of my other clerks have some other ideas about that. But we feel this is a very special place, and we're glad you're all here. The Oregon Association of County Clerks, along with co-hosts, the U.S. Department of Justice and the FBI and the Oregon Secretary of State's office, thank you and welcome you and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to attend this symposium. We hope you find this symposium informative and, more important, actionable. Elections are run at the county level in Oregon and actually in most of the nation. We, as well as the Oregon Secretary of State, are your go-to source for accurate information as to time, place, and manner of elections. And remember that when you see things on Facebook and that kind of stuff. Anything suspicious, check with us. Our job, the clerk's job here, is to be sure the mechanics of voting, including voter registration, public notification of an election, receiving candidates and measure filings, checking signatures on petitions to get people or issues on the ballot, designing, printing, and issuing ballots. Sometimes, as our clerks here will tell you, where we have several hundred unique different ballot styles in the same election. And as a pharmacist, you know, the thing was always to get the right medicine to the right person at the right time. And in this business, it's try to get the right ballot to the right person at the right time. And so besides designing and issuing the ballots, we also design and print and distribute voters' pamphlets. Then we collect the voted ballots, then we count the ballots, and then we certify the results. It seems like, you know, you just say you're doing in elections, but there are so many steps, and this is actually abbreviated. My professional people here in the room that do this understand, but I wanted to be sure that you felt some of the gravity of the different types of things that we do. And we have to make sure this is all done in a timely, completely, securely, accurately, and fair manner. Upholding the integrity of elections is essential for the public's faith in democracy and just governance for the benefit of all, not just a powerful, wily few. So voters, we are the ones that get to determine how things go if we get out and vote. In Oregon, we are fortunate that we use paper ballots readable by people. If there's a question, we can recount the election by hand. We regularly perform post-election audits. Our ballot reading equipment is not connected to the internet. With automatic voter registration, over 90% of people in Oregon who are registered, who are eligible to vote, are registered. And we make it easy for anyone who is qualified and desires to register, to get a ballot, and to vote. That's our commitment. It's a long-term commitment from people way before us to the future, and that's why we have to uphold the integrity of what we're doing. Oregon's county clerks and election officials encourage each of you here today, as well as future viewers of this symposium, to come visit our county elections office, meet our staff, and observe our ballot handling procedures. This year, this is a year to celebrate a huge advance in elections and democracy. 2020 marks the 100th year of women's suffrage. The League of Women Voters will be hosting activities throughout Oregon, including a luncheon here on March the 7th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. So those of you here close, make reservations. Those of you who live in other places, find out where those events are going to be. Here we'll be having present and former governors, women, and other office holders, statewide office holders to greet you. This is also the 55th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Why is this important? This is the act that, through enforcement of the 14th and 15th U.S. constitutional amendments of around the Civil War era, helped people of color to regain the ability they first won, then lost during the end of Reconstruction, to vote today. The Voting Rights Act prevents voting discrimination based on race, color, or membership in a language minority group. Under Oregon's original constitution, I would be branded a mulatto and not allowed to vote, much less serve in elected office as Marion County Clerk. So we've come a long, long way, folks, and we've still got more to go. Today's symposium is the result of the maturing of awareness of a heightened threat to our democracy with cybersecurity concerns. Now, historically, individuals and factions have tried to undermine elections by denying others the ability to vote through things such as selective, surgically restrictive voter registration laws, by intimidation, sometimes very violent intimidation at the ballot box, by disinformation and other nefarious acts. Marion County experienced a concerted effort to slow traffic to our election office on election day in 2006. And since the beginning of this nation, we've endured yellow journalism and outlandishly false claims about candidates and issues. Fortunately, many of us were taught in school to see through such slick Madison Avenue advertising. But today, in our new cyber-dependent environment, bad actors, be they nation states or fringe groups, have an oversized ability to misinform, mislead, misdirect, to lie to disgust, and to discourage voters from voting. So, how do we overcome the threats of today? Fortunately, the Department of Homeland Security on January the 7th, 2017, designated elections as an essential government infrastructure, bringing to bear several federal intelligence and law enforcement groups, including the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI. Same type of characterization as we do for things like our dams, electricity, natural gas, the finance community. We know that all these things are so important for the vitality of our country that it's really a blessing to us that the federal government has come in to work and partner with people to make a big difference. Let's see. And also it brought in some non-government partners like the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, the Election Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center that Steve talked about, and the Center for Internet Security, and a dozen others, including the one that Secretary of State Bev Clarno talked about that I'm not even going to try to pronounce. And all this to steadily increase the sharing of information and resources to strengthen election security and to build better resiliency, better preparation, so that even if we do get whacked, we have ways to come back. And in the end, you know, especially in Oregon here with our paper ballots, no matter what somebody might do to somebody's website or put up in the news, we're going to get the right count when we certify that election. And do we certify it election night? No. We certify it 20 days after the election so that we're sure that everything is proper. We're privileged to have the U.S. Department of Justice organize this symposium so all your campaigns here will be well informed as to the changing cyber landscape and providing full, useful tools to help protect the integrity of each campaign from cyber interference and compromise. That is really important. We're all a team, even the candidates that are maybe vying against each other. We all still need to have a secure process for our campaigns and make sure we can protect our messages. So instead of letting the bad guys in, we need to let earnest Oregonians determine what is best for Oregon. Now, you're going to enjoy the following speakers. FBI Special Agent Matt Yeager will start the deep dive into our symposium off with an overview of the threat we are facing. Following speakers will address various specific threats, you may have an agenda, and measures so we can better secure our systems and our message. We'll have a 10-minute break around 7:45, and speakers will stay for about half an hour after our 9 o'clock target closing time to answer questions that they weren't able to get to. Your Oregon Association of County Clerks is glad you are here to help uphold our elections and democracy. And now, Special Agent Matt Yeager. Hot diggity dog.
Good evening. If you're like me, you're now sufficiently afraid to check your email. I had no idea there was going to be a test of phishing going on this evening, but should have left my phone in the car. My name is Matt Yeager. I'm from the FBI Seattle Division. Before that, I was in a group called the Foreign Influence Task Force at FBI headquarters. The Foreign Influence Task Force was stood up by FBI Director Christopher Wray a couple years ago to address the threat of foreign election interference and foreign malign influence. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to define what foreign influence is. I'm going to talk about the state actors that are engaged in the activity right now, some of their tradecraft, their methodology, some of the defenses and tools that we have. And then I want to add some meat to the bones of the 2016 to 2018 Russian interference that we did see and show you the example of exactly how that worked. So when we're talking about foreign influence and foreign malign influence, what we're talking about is a state actor that is trying to manipulate legitimate U.S. political activity, our economic systems, and our U.S. social goals through coercion and through not declaring that they're engaged in this activity. So foreign malign influence is not to be confused with legitimate diplomatic activity through formal diplomatic channels. So what does this look like? Some examples of foreign malign influence might be a state actor tries to get a person to become a member of an NGO or a company, or become an advisor to Congress, or become an advisor to a campaign, and those people aren't disclosing to the campaign, or the companies, or the NGOs that they are actually working at the behest of a foreign government. So the goals of these foreign influence operations are to sow discord in America. They're trying to muddy our political discourse, and they're trying to undermine our democratic institutions. If they can get Americans fighting and bickering, they are winning. And so there's a myth that foreign influence operations are merely trying to pick a particular political candidate and bubble that person up to the top for victory. And that's not entirely accurate. They're trying to rip apart America at the seams. And so some of the other activities that we see, we've seen the covert placement of articles in the media by these foreign actors. We've seen them funding politically active groups in the United States that espouse a particular message. We've seen economic coercion. We've seen social media disinformation. We've seen good old-fashioned bribery, and we've seen blackmail. So to address this foreign influence threat, the FBI, partnering with the Department of Homeland Security and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, created a public outreach initiative. It's called the Protected Voices Initiative. And what it is it's a repository of information for the public, for campaigns, and for private companies to learn what foreign influence is and how to protect their elections and how to protect their infrastructure. So the website's on the slide behind me. Please take a look at the Protected Voices Initiative. There's a myriad of videos there, not just for campaign leadership, but everyone working in the campaign, down to the part-time volunteer level. So what's happening is these foreign state actors are trying to hijack the voice of your campaigns. They want to take your message and use it as their own. They want to manipulate that message. They want to do everything they can to confuse our American-based audience. The three main state actors that we're seeing active in this space right now are Russia, China, and Iran. Russia is the most brazen actor right now. From 2016 to 2018, they engaged in hack and leak operations and social media disinformation campaigns. I'll discuss that in more detail here in just a few moments. But the Russians have interfered in elections in France, Italy, Macedonia, the Ukraine, the United Kingdom, and here in the United States. China also engages in foreign influence activities. In 2008, they engaged in hacking. They've currently engaged in some covert media operations. They like to focus internally on their economic stability, but their messages usually relate to around human rights issues and issues relating to Tibet and Taiwan. Iran also operates a social media disinformation operation. So those are our three main actors right now. There are three main ways that these foreign actors interfere in our elections. Number one is through cyber attacks. Number two is through the covert funding of money, personnel, and information injecting into a campaign. And the third way is through social media disinformation. So to start with the first one, cyber attacks, these might take the form of hack and leak operations. They might take the form of denial of service operations. They might attempt to steal or change data or manipulate data. And it's important to note that even if these cyber attacks aren't successful, the insinuation or the accusation that there is voter manipulation or data manipulation happening plays into their foreign influence operations of muddying our discourse. Also of note, the vast majority of the cyber attacks that we have seen were facilitated by an unwitting American on the inside of a campaign, clicking on an email that they should not have clicked on. So the best defense against these cyber attacks is not in a faraway distant land. It's not with the Department of Homeland Security. It's with all of us exhibiting personal, excellent cyber hygiene. And so I do want to rattle off some of the videos that are available in our Protected Voices initiative that help protect us against cyber attacks. So hopefully these will pique your interest and it'll force you to go on there and take a look at this. We have some nice videos that will give you some background information on passphrases and multi-factor authentication, router hardening, cloud-based services, supply chain, ransomware, social media literacy, foreign influence, business email compromise, social engineering, hacking, incident response, patching, firewalls, antivirus software, safer campaign communications, Wi-Fi, InfoSec, VPNs, and browser and app safety. And we're going to hear about this in some more detail from my FBI colleague later in the evening. But the second way that we're seeing these foreign actors influence our elections is in the covert funding of money, personnel, and information into the campaigns. So these foreign actors, the Russians, the Chinese, and the Iranians, they know that it's illegal to directly fund a campaign. So what they try to do is they try to find a U.S. person that's going to act as an intermediary to get that money into the campaign. So the best defense we have against this is the diligent vetting of all funds coming into the campaign. There's also a concern that these foreign actors are going to try to insert personnel or information into a campaign. The way they might do this could be someone that's a part-time volunteer, someone that befriends the campaign on social media, unfamiliar to the campaign. This person comes and tries to add information to the platform, tries to add or manipulate or change a message. So we're concerned about that, and the best defense against that is know who's in your campaign. Diligently vet all the people in the campaign, not just the leadership and the people in charge, but again, even the lower tiered people and even the part-time volunteers. So the third thing that we're very concerned about, and I'll spend some time here, is through social media disinformation campaigns. So very much at the wave tops, we've seen US personas, bots, and trolls being manipulated online to muddy the discourse on social media. And the best defense against this is media literacy. And if you do see a social media page that you believe is malign influence or coming from a foreign government, we need to report that to the social media company where you found it. And also, before you repost a message or a social media thing that you like, please be sure that you know the primary source of that information and where it came from. Because the viral posting of this bad information is very difficult to control, especially if they're hijacking a legitimate-looking campaign to push that message. So I do want to talk very briefly and give you a specific example and put some meat on the bones of what happened in 2016 to 2018 with the Russian election interference. A lot of this is publicly available, and you can go find this out on your own, but there's a lot of white noise around it. It's kind of scattered, and it's difficult to understand. So I'm going to try to boil it down and tell you a story of what happened. So there's a rich guy in Russia. His last name's Prigozhin, and he's an oligarch. He made millions of dollars doing catering contracts in the Russian Federation, so they call him Putin's chef. He decided that he was going to start a group with hundreds of employees and millions of dollars and call it the Internet Research Agency. The Internet Research Agency, like I said, is very well funded. It had some nice front companies. It's very well organized. There's a data analytics department. There's a search engine optimization department. There's an IT department. There's a finance department. There's a graphics department, and all kinds of departments. Probably a shoe department. But the Internet Research Agency, starting in 2013 and 2014, had a stated purpose to sow discord in the United States. That was their stated purpose. So what they did in 2014 is employees from St. Petersburg, Russia, associated with the Internet Research Agency, sent 2 people to the United States. And those people lied on their visa applications about what they were doing here. What those people did is they traveled to multiple states in the United States. Off the top of my head, California, Nevada, New Mexico, Illinois, Texas, and New York. What these people were trying to do is get the pulse of what Americans are bickering about and what we're really concerned about at the grassroots level. They were vectoring in on what's important to us. And then they wrote intelligence reports about this, and they sent it back to employees of the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg, Russia. Also, while they were here, they used some US-based computer infrastructure so that they could hide the Russian origins of their activity. But armed with the information about what Americans are bickering about, the Internet Research Agency went on social media. At this point, they started using US-based personas. What that means is a person in Russia goes online and they act like an American. So it's not their true name. They're claiming to be Bob Smith American. Sorry if there's any actual Bob Smiths in here. It's not you. We also saw instances where they just stole the identity of legitimate Americans and started using their name to facilitate conversations on social media platforms. So after they started using US personas, they started communicating with different groups on different social media platforms. Then they started building out their own social media pages. And they were very good at doing hot washes and brief backs about the effectiveness of these pages. They would see how many viewers were viewing the page, how many conversations were happening. They were doing everything they could to optimize those pages to draw in Americans. And they drew in hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Americans. And I want to share with you some specific examples of some of the social media pages that we saw them create. And some of the names of these groups are politically sensitive, and they will probably raise your blood pressure. And I do want to note that we saw Internet Research Agency activity making social media pages across the entire political spectrum, both left-leaning, right-leaning, and everything in between. So they created one group in particular called Secure Borders that was trying to muddy the discourse around immigration. They had a group called United Muslims of America trying to stir the pot on religious issues. During the high-profile period where we had a lot of African-American police shootings in the public discourse, the Internet Research Agency created a group called Blacktivist, and they were posing as US-based African-American activists. On this page in particular, the Russians were actually discouraging the African-American community from voting, and they were encouraging third-party voting. So a Russian would go onto this page and say, hey, this particular political candidate has abandoned you. You'd be better off staying home and not even voting. Or this political candidate has abandoned you. You should peel off and vote for this third party. We also saw them creating social media groups called Stop AI, and groups that were talking about voter fraud and creating conspiracy theory and insinuation about completely undocumented voter fraud. We also saw them create a group called the Tennessee GOP, completely fraudulent group. And there's a lot of very good citizens that are unwitting participating in these groups across the political spectrum. So I think a lot of people are aware that the Russians were engaged in these social media activities, but I think that a lot of people think that it was just merely internet clickbait. But the Internet Research Agency actually evolved, and they started taking their political rallies to the streets. They actually were able to get Americans to put boots on the ground. I'll give you a few examples of how they did that also. They actually posted a photo on their leader Prigozhin's birthday of an individual standing in front of the White House with a sign up that said, "Happy birthday, boss." So they wanted to prove that they could get signage up in the heart of the US Capitol. We also know that in 2016, a group called United Muslims of America staged a political rally in Washington, D.C. that was facilitated by the Internet Research Agency. In 2016, there was another group called Being Patriotic that facilitated a political rally in New York. In 2016 in Florida, there was a series of political rallies facilitated by the Internet Research Agency where they actually provided megaphones and placards for these rallies. So they were very much providing tactical support and guidance. We also know that there were particular campaign rallies in Florida where good citizens attended and engaged in political demonstrations. It all should have been good fun, and law enforcement should have not been concerned about it. However, the US people that were engaging in those demonstrations didn't know that they were being funded to do that by Russians. And so when investigators went out to discuss this with them, these people were very confused about what was happening and who was giving them this money. And all this contributes to muddying the public discourse and sowing discord in the United States. So as mentioned earlier, this is a whole of society response that's going to be needed to combat this. It's not just going to be federal law enforcement or the intelligence community. It's going to have to be state and local partners, private companies, NGOs educating the public, because people are going to have to start recognizing that this activity is taking place. And anecdotally, from my own personal experience, having looked at a lot of the influence operations over the past few years, I absolutely want to emphasize that this doesn't just happen during high-profile national elections. This is ongoing constantly around any issue that is politically and socially divisive in the United States. All those items that your mother told you not to talk about at the dinner table, race, religion, politics, they're trying to exploit that to get us to hate each other. So I've identified the wave tops of the problem. And so the rest of our presenters are going to add some more meat to that, talk about the scalability, the veracity of some of this problem. But they're also going to give us some of our tools, defenses, and how we can protect against this. But your campaign matters, your voice matters. We need help to protect it. Thank you.
It's a little bright up here. Good evening. I am not going to introduce myself because apparently I'm the only speaker on this agenda with a bio, and I'm not sure why. So you can read it, and I can just get right into it because I know we're a little pressed for time. My name is Sam Corda, though. That is truthful information on here. I did want to highlight, because Matt's presentation was perfect in setting up kind of what I want to talk about and what I study. And that's not just looking at who's doing these things, but how and why is it so effective. If you read my bio, you'll see that I come from Homeland Security, law enforcement, domestic intelligence, and I spent 13 years working in that environment. And one of the things that was really hard for me was we have to respond to so many different critical incidents. And when Sandy Hook happened, and I think we're all aware of what Sandy Hook is, that was a really hard day for the families and the first responders and the people that had to show up. And then after that occurred, there were mountains of conspiracy theories that resulted in death threats to the families that had just lost their children. On top of that, law enforcement then had to deal with those death threats, and it just compounded into this unnecessary environment that we had to deal with, and it made me really upset. And so, fortunately, I guess, I was in the Naval Postgraduate School master's program, and I wanted to understand how this disinformation environment evolved. And so I spent my time in that program studying this issue and trying to understand what exactly was happening and why. It's funny because I thought I was going to spend time on the dark web, going into covert forums and trying to understand these actors that were trying to spread this information. And then I started doing research and I realized it's all right out in the open. There's nothing that you need to get into. I mean, there's also forums like that, but you can see this right in front of you, and I think that's why it's so effective. So today I'm going to talk about something that in my thesis is coined information laundering. And part of the reason I call it this, and it's also something that it actually is a term that manifested in I think it was 2012 was the original researcher who coined this term. So this was something that has been looked at for a while. But the idea of information laundering, it's built on a money laundering metaphor. So if you think about it from like a financial ecosystem metaphor, we didn't build banking and financial systems so that we could launder money, so that we could take dirty money and make it clean. We built the financial system to help us pay for things and trade goods and do all the things that you need to run a society. And so the information laundering metaphor is helpful in this situation because we didn't create the internet ecosystem so that we could spread bad information. It's an outcome that I don't think any of the platforms, at least the main social media and other platforms on the internet, intended to have as an outcome. It's just something that was leveraged based on the internet ecosystem we created. So I'll talk a little bit about that. But before I do, I just want to define what I call information laundering. So that's the process of normalizing false or extremely biased information by leveraging the interconnectedness of online mechanisms until that information becomes part of public discourse. So the idea here is we have an internet ecosystem, and I'll get into that a little bit, what that means, that actors can leverage, spread information around, you lose track of the source, you lose track of where it came from. They take advantage of legitimate sources by attaching themselves in ways that make them seem more legitimate, and then information that probably would never have even been spoken about 20 years ago is now part of public discourse as if it's normal that we should be talking about it. So I already gave the example about the Sandy Hook and the death threats and the conspiracy theories. This happens after every mass shooting. Sandy Hook was just, I think, very emotional because of the age of the children that were killed. But after every mass shooting, there's conspiracy theories and ideas that the actual events never happened, that it's a false flag. And most of the time it results in death threats and other follow-on activities for the families, the victims, and law enforcement and other first responders. This is not just an online problem, which I know several people have spoken about as well. We've had incidents that have manifested from the internet into actual physical threats. I think one that many people are aware of is Pizzagate, which there was online conspiracy theories that were formed in online forums like Reddit and 4chan, amplified by media sources like InfoWars and other mechanisms. The gunman believed that there was a pedophile ring within the basement of that facility, and he went there armed to do something about it. There was no actual physical evidence or information to suggest there actually was a pedophilia ring in the basement of the facility, and actually there was no basement in the facility at all. But regardless, he showed up, he discharged his weapon. Luckily, no one got hurt, but that could have definitely resulted in a different outcome. So while we look at these things when we're talking just disinformation as if it's not something that we need to be concerned about because it's just this online dumpster fire, it actually is manifesting in very physical, real threats, whether it's the physical threats I just talked about, death threats, but also undermining the trust and credibility of our institutions, our election systems, sowing discord, and distorting our international and domestic opinions. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. I'll get into the model as well. But before I do that, I do want to talk very briefly, because a lot of people have covered it thus far, and I don't claim to be an election security expert. I study disinformation and fake news and take it a level up and think about the internet ecosystem as a whole. And this is much more than just an election security issue. It's an issue to our democracy. It's an issue to the way our society functions. But from an election security standpoint, I think a lot of people have covered it. Suppressing voters, undermining the integrity of the election. It's really interesting to think that you don't actually have to hack physically an election. All you have to do is convince people that you have. It's cheaper, it's easier, spreads faster. So those are the kinds of things that we're dealing with. And I know I admire the work that everyone in this room is doing. It's an important job, and I appreciate your efforts, and I'm glad everyone's here. I think to tie it a little bit to Oregon, not Oregon, I'm learning how to pronounce it. You have had a couple, I did some initial research on some of the disinformation you've had, just very simple ones. You had a campaign where they were suggesting that it would take 2 stamps to mail in the Oregon ballot. That was actually California that had that, and there was a lot of disinformation around that. The level of impact of that, is debatable, but it's certainly a way to potentially encourage people not to want to vote or get confused about the process. I think another one that did get a lot of attention was during the 2016 presidential election. One of the candidates was left off of the ballot, or they said was left off of the ballot, and instead they just duplicated the other candidate. And it was actually a digitally altered image that went viral. And later the author said it was a hoax. But by that time, the information had already spread. People started to believe it. So that certainly has an impact on the trust of the outcomes of an election if you don't believe that the candidate was even on the ballot. So certainly there are things to be concerned about from that perspective, from a disinformation, from a voter suppression. Certainly you want everyone to have the opportunity to vote, and they shouldn't be discouraged by foreign or domestic actors to do otherwise. So again, we've been talking a lot about foreign influence. I'm not going to go into actors because this whole model that I talk about is actually actor agnostic. We've built an internet ecosystem that allows fake news to spread at a velocity and speed that we've never seen before, and that's why it's so effective. So, in very, very simple terms, this is how information laundering works. You create the fake story, you propagate it on the internet, and it becomes accepted as part of public discourse. Again, I go back to the financial system. We created a banking system that we use to legitimately buy things and share wealth and purchase goods. But then bad actors realized they could leverage that system to launder dirty money and have it come out as clean. So again, we built an internet ecosystem, which I'll talk about a little bit more in depth, that allows us to take bad information, which I call counterfeit narratives, put it into the internet ecosystem, launder it around, and then it comes out as public discourse, as if it's something normal to talk about. This is a more complex version of the information laundering model. Again, you take the counterfeit narrative, you drop it into the internet ecosystem, which you can see here is broken into 3 subcomponents. We've got the enablers, which I'll talk a little bit about, accelerators, and then amplifiers. Accelerators and amplifiers are not required to spread disinformation, but they certainly help spread it faster. So before I go into those, I want to talk a little bit about what I was calling the internet ecosystem and what I mean by enablers. So the term enablers doesn't really matter. The way they're bucketed matters, and it's more of a metaphor of helping us understand the environment we created, because it's more than just the social media platforms that are part of the internet ecosystem. In the early 2000s, I think it was, our internet environment changed to more of a multi-way platform to share information. It was no longer one-to-many. Everyone could go on and you could leave a footprint on the website through comments, or you could take a website and you could share it on other platforms, and that created an internet interconnectedness that allowed us to share information faster, good information and bad information. But that interconnectedness is really kind of the catalyst that started this. And you'll see here, I broke the internet ecosystem into 4 boxes. It doesn't matter specifically today what are in each box, but there's 4 primary components. The first is discovery. That's going to be your search engines. So they're the pathway to first get that information. Matt talked about how the Internet Research Agency had search engine optimization capabilities. There's a lot of algorithms involved in what you see when you Google something, and having that ability to optimize the results can impact the kind of information you're seeing. So you can spread bad information using search engine optimization, using the algorithms that come from that. Also during critical incidents, because people are searching so quickly, a lot of times bad information, even if it's not purposefully being disseminated, can rise to the top as well. This happens a lot during mass shootings and things like that. The next one is information. These are your news sources and your academic research. So obviously there's a spectrum of bias across the different media outlets, and there are good and not so good academic journals, but they're all online, and you can comment on them and you can share them, and they're connected, and they write on the other enablers as well, and it all becomes this interconnected ecosystem. The next one is opinion. This is going to be your blogosphere, your user-generated content. the Reddits, the 4chans, the YouTubes, really emphasizing creativity and diversity, which is good, but that allows for a lot of content to be created and then shared and then written on by media sources and things like that. And then finally, expression. Those are going to be your social networks, your social platforms, traditionally what we think about when we're thinking about disinformation or fake news or information laundering. But I would offer that it's not just that enabler, it's the interconnectedness of all 4 of those factors that are creating this issue and why it's so widespread. I'm going to take a step back now and go into the first phase, which is placement. This is creating the fake story in a way that resonates with the person who's reading it. There's a lot of factors that go into how to create a counterfeit narrative that really resonates. Some of them are as easy as just replicating legitimate sites and making it look real. You can just take domains that are very close to the actual website, or you can replicate real news outlets and make it look like it's a legitimate story, but really it's fake. And that is a lot of researchers call that technical ethos. So looking at something and it looks legitimate, so I am more apt to believe it because it looks professionally done and things like that. Matt also mentioned phishing, so actually hacking into somebody's account and pushing out information on a legitimate account. That's going to create authority bias that legitimate source probably is going to push out good information, so why wouldn't I trust it? The big one that I think we really need to be concerned about, and that I think people are starting to talk about, but I don't think we're talking about it enough, is deepfakes. So deepfakes are when you take artificial intelligence to take the image of one person and put it into a video of another to make it look like that person is in the video when actually it was someone else. They also can just create words or audio clips connected to video that people have never said. And that can have a lot of impact in terms of election security or just national security in general. Imagine you had a candidate that never said, I hate a certain type of people, but they created a deep fake that showed that person saying that. That's certainly something that feels a little bit like science fiction, but I wouldn't even call this emerging technology anymore. I would call this a technology that's being perfected, and that there are actual companies striving to perfect this, because it's a challenge to be able to do this. And they're close. So it really only takes about 30 to 40 minutes now of audio and video of a person in order to create a deepfake of them. So if you've got a candidate who's been videoed 30 to 40 minutes, that's like one presentation up here. They can create a deepfake of that person pretty believably. There are measures being taken by social media platforms to kind of combat this, and I'm sure others who will be up here will talk about that a little bit. But that isn't going to fix all of what's out there. So there, besides the deep fakes, which are the real AI, there's also things like cheap fakes or shallow fakes, which is just editing video that exists in a way that is misleading, or taking it out of context and disseminating it, speeding it up or slowing it down so it gives the appearance of one thing when it really wasn't that. And that's not often something that can easily be identified and removed off of social media. So there's a lot that goes into this problem, and a lot we still have to do to understand it. And I think there's still a lot of conversation that needs to happen around this. So just something to be aware of, something to be on your radar. And this is all, again, going back to the model. This is the very first phase. This is placement. I'm a bad actor. I'm now ready. I have my deep fake, or I have my shallow fake, or I have my image, or I have my words, my counterfeit narrative. I'm now going to drop it into the internet ecosystem. Part of when the person sees the people who are exposed to this information, a large part of the reason why it's believable is because we've been talking a lot about the supply of bad information, disinformation, fake news, information laundering, but there's actually a heavy demand for it just based on the way that our brains operate. So it's tied to the psychology of how we consume information and form opinions. It has factors in evolutionary biology. There's good reason we do this. It's all about shortcuts and making quick decisions and things like that. But that psychology creates a bias in us that makes us more prone to actually go out and seek disinformation, whether we realize it or not. So I'm not going to get into all of the different types of drivers I have up here, but some of the ones that I wanted to highlight are, I think it was mentioned, anything that has heightened emotion. So anything that manifests fear, disgust, awe, anger, anxiety, that's more likely to spread because someone's going to feel that and then want to spread it. Our brains are wired for storytelling, so anything that elicits emotion is often storytelling, and people want to share stories. Our humanity is built on storytelling. Before we could write, we told stories. So that is a big reason why bad information spreads. Also, they did a study at MIT looking at bad information and good information and which one spread faster, and they found that bad information spreads 6 times faster than good information, simply because it's novel and people like novelty. And if it's a lie, you've probably never heard that information before, so you're more likely to spread it. The other thing, and this is a big one, and I think we all have experienced this, is the concept of confirmation bias. So we go out seeking information that validates our own opinion, and disconfirmation bias, which is we downplay the sources that disagree with our opinion. And then motivated reasoning is, as we assess the information out there, we favor the information that is more aligned with our beliefs. So this is all a factor. This is all being human. This is just something we need to be aware of. And if I have time, I'll talk a little bit about some of the things we need to do to combat this. And one of the biggest things is just being aware that we are biased in this way and thinking about these things before we click on them, before we share them. I think a lot of people have talked about that already. So I go back to what I was talking about before about my enablers. The internet ecosystem is a giant social network, the entire internet. And every tweak on every platform creates an impact that ripples across the ecosystem. So I really want to highlight what Matt said about this not being just a federal government problem, state and local problem, a single platform problem. This is a holistic issue that we need to fight together. It's not something that we're going to be able to just have the federal government take care of. Okay, so the internet ecosystem, we have the information that spreads that is interconnected. You lose track of the source, you lose track of where it came from, you start talking about it. There are now technologies, behaviors, actions that can help it spread faster. So in my model, I talk about these as accelerators. You'll hear a number of different technologies that they're going to emerge and disappear, and new ones are going to come out. The idea of accelerators is anything that helps information, whether good or bad, spread faster. The one I want to highlight, and that I think a lot of people have heard about, are bots. Researchers are calling this computational propaganda. So a bot is just a piece of computer code that helps you do a specific task. Bots are neither good or bad, but when they're used to help spread disinformation faster, they really help get information out in a way we've never seen before. I go back to some of the biases and drivers that I talked about. When you have bots that can orchestrate a campaign to make it seem like there's a lot of people talking about something, that triggers a bias in us that if a lot of people are agreeing to it, it must be true. That fake grassroots effort is something called astroturfing, and it could just be a few bots talking about it, but we think it's a lot of people talking about it, and then we're more prone to believe it. There are other kinds of accelerators. I would argue the online targeted advertising is a way to accelerate information because it gets it to the people that are going to be most impacted by it. You've got trolls and cyborgs and things like that. I don't have time to get into all of those, but anything that helps spread the information faster contributes to why this information is spreading so quickly. The last one is amplifiers. So we talk a lot about foreign influence, and I'm not going to get into if there's more foreign or domestic information laundering campaigns. It doesn't actually matter. But what happens in a lot of these cases is a secondary actor will see an existing campaign, or they'll see the discourse or the polarization happening, and they'll take advantage of that. They don't actually care one way or the other. They just want to sow chaos, or they are motivated financially, and they know if they spread information, it'll get more clicks. They'll get money generated from those clicks. Call these amplifiers. They can be ideologically, politically, or financially motivated, and they just make what's already being spread and accelerated now amplified and worse. So again, I'm not going to get into that in great length, especially because I don't want to talk about actors, but that's on top of what was already happening with accelerators, another factor contributing to the spread of disinformation. So then at the end, it comes out clean. We're talking about something we probably never would have talked about before. There's a lot of examples of this. And you just think back to 20 years ago, would we even be having this conversation? It becomes part of public discourse. It becomes part of something that we think is normal to talk about. So given that I think I don't have much time left and I want to be cognizant that I had 25 minutes, I'm going to speed through what we can do about it because there's a lot of people here that talk about what we can do about it. I think the biggest thing for me, if you take nothing away from this, is that this is the disinformation, the thing that everyone is up here saying is the biggest threat to election security. What's scary is that it's not just an election security problem. It's a whole of democracy problem. It is something requiring a holistic approach. It's not something we're going to solve in the next 3 hours, 2.5 hours that we have here, but there are things that we can do now to start to combat it from an election security standpoint. So I go back to the model, and the reason to me why I like the model so much is because it kind of helps you wrap your head around solutions. So not only does it help you kind of visualize what's going on and why and how, but also you can look at the various components to see if there are things you can do at those different stages to try to get ahead of it and try to combat it. So again, I'm not going to get into great detail, but research is really starting to show that even just general awareness and asking people to think twice before they click on things is one of the most effective ways to combat this issue. We are all susceptible to it, and acknowledging that none of us are immune from this issue is also really important, especially as you're running campaigns and you're pushing out information and you're retweeting information. Knowing that you hold the keys to not spreading disinformation is also really important. So just general awareness. I don't know if I have time, but I did do some research on some of the folks in the room, and there's a really good article from Mr. Trout about just generally what you should do when information, before you click or spread information. First, is there any data or evidence to support the information that's being articulated in wherever you're reading it? Second, does it feel like it's trying to push my political buttons? Third, is there something about it that doesn't seem right or seems bizarre? Fourth, who is sharing this information? And then fifth, would they have an agenda? So thinking through those, encouraging your citizens and your staff to think about that before pushing out information, I think is really important. I think it's a great message for the people of Oregon, not Oregon. The other piece, so that from a general awareness standpoint, that's the entire model, right? But then we have things like placements. How can we start to prevent some of the things from getting out in terms of spreading the bad counterfeit narrative? And there are basic things that were spoken about by Matt. Cyber hygiene is really critical, making sure you're using multi-factor authentication, making sure you have strong passwords, not leaving your devices on computers, then walking away. All of those things can help from a very just hard cybersecurity standpoint. You combat some of these issues. Another mitigation measure that you can use is understanding your own network. So I imagine there are a lot of folks in the room who manage the campaigns on social media, and you probably are aware of the impact you're having online. you probably, hopefully, know who your influences are. And if you have a sense for the kind of disinformation that might get spread, if you could tap your influencers early and have them spread good information before the bad information gets out there, it's a good way to kind of combat this issue. It's referred to as inoculation. Priming people for good information before the bad information hits makes them more likely to believe the information because that was the first information they saw. Now you're not mind readers, you don't know everything that's going out, but I've seen a lot on, again, going back to Mr. Trout, there's a lot of good information coming out about, the information that the best practices learned from previous elections, that the voting centers are not going to close early, that all the good information is on that one website. Those kinds of things are really helpful to make sure that you're inoculating the public early before the bad information hits. The other piece, and this is throughout the model, especially in layering, is information sharing. And I'm not going to talk about this at length because everybody from the very beginning has talked about this. All of the intro speakers talked about this. You guys have a great information sharing network here in the state of Oregon. I love that the Fusion Center's here. Shout out to the Fusion Center because I used to be a Fusion Center deputy director myself, and I love that they're here. I think it's really critical that we leverage the trust building network of our Fusion Centers to help combat disinformation. The last piece I'm going to talk about, because I know we're getting really close on time, and George is he's gonna yell at me, is how do we debunk or fact check some of the bad information that's out there? And I want us to be really hesitant to do that because there's a lot of emerging research around fact checking and the fact that pushing out the lie and then trying to combat it could actually spread it farther and then have a backfire effect where it reinforces the people's original belief rather than having them change their views because you presented a fact. So I go back to originally when I talked about storytelling. A really good way to look at combating this is first, anything that you're going to combat, it needs to be a complete model. So the best analogy I can give, and again, I come from law enforcement, is if you're going to debunk someone's guilt, so if you want to claim that this person is not the murderer, it's better to say he is not the murderer and this person is the murderer and here's why, than just to say this person's innocent. Because people don't like incomplete models. They'd rather take an incorrect model than an incomplete model. So if you're going to try to debunk information, it needs to be complete. Also using graphics and images, again, that goes back to storytelling. That can be more useful than just pushing out facts or words. Also, if it's an image or words that are the disinformation you're trying to combat or debunk, be very careful about spreading the actual original content, because if you're not really good at pushing, false or making it very clear that that's not true, taking out of context, people will think that it is the actual information and they might tend to believe it. So there's a lot of hurdles to fact checking. I'm not saying that before you post, you shouldn't fact check. You should absolutely check your sources. This would be, how do you push out corrected information to the public? So there's a lot of assumptions we make. The first is that people are going to see your fact check. The second is that they're going to change their beliefs just because you pushed out some truth. And actually what typically happens or can often happen, and I mentioned this before, is it's called the backfire effect. It actually reinforces their original beliefs. So there are some best practices to push this out in an effective way. But again, I would proceed with caution. It's a balancing act. Sometimes it's better to just ignore it if it's not getting the virality that you're seeing online. But two things to keep in mind when fact checking that might be effective. One, take advantage of ideologically aligned people when trying to reach a certain group. If you've got an influencer or an ally that could push that information out for you on your behalf to the group that already agrees with most of their beliefs, that's going to be more effective. Not always the case, not always someone available that can do that. And the second piece is, there is some research to show that if you prompt someone to be civic-minded or a good citizen, or think about things before they click, that can help before you then present the fact checked. But again, I would just offer as I close that you should proceed with caution around fact checking, the inoculation, the getting the information out early, not letting information gaps happen. Those things are going to be more effective than just trying to spread counter narratives. I have a slide for questions, but that's at the end. So now I'm going to send you to the break.
Fantastic, Sam. Thank you. All right, folks, we are running behind and we have a ton of great content, so we will cut the break just a little bit. We'll give you 10 minutes, but we'll start leaning back into it after about 7. So jump up, stretch your legs, get a drink of water, use the restrooms, and we'll keep going soon. I'd just like to note, again, this is a great room full of people that want nothing more than to secure the election. So, and this, what we're talking about is not a new problem. So a couple hundred years ago, Jonathan Swift said that a lie can travel halfway around the globe while the truth is still putting on its shoes. So Americans are full of horse sense because we educate ourselves and because we work together. So as you take your seats, it's my pleasure to announce another factor of the team and the collaborative effort to make sure that we're securing the elections, and that is Eva Guidarini, right? Got it? From Facebook. So obviously Facebook plays a key role, and she's going to talk to you about what Facebook is doing to contribute to the security of information and the security of the election. Eva.
Thank you so much for having me, everybody. I'm going to speed through this and try to leave about 5 minutes at the end so we can get to some of your questions early on here. So we're going to dive right into an elections integrity overview. There's obviously a million things Facebook is doing to keep these elections safe and secure, but we're going to focus on just a couple of them here. First thing I want to touch on is just some numbers about the work that we're doing in this space. We've got 35,000 people around the world working on safety and security, which is 3 times as many as in 2017 and even more than that in 2016. So we've really got a huge number of people focused in on this area. We've got 40 teams across the company that are working together on this work, and we're really working on drawing on lessons from past elections. So that's not just the US midterms and the 2016 election, but also the whole host of international elections that we've had over the past few years so that we can learn and iterate and build better processes. So 2 of the key objectives I want to talk about here today are reducing harmful content, or removing harmful content and reducing misinformation, as well as increasing transparency. So we now have a voter suppression and intimidation policy on Facebook. So this is a set of our community standards, which means that any content that violates this policy, be it in an ad or in regular organic content on the platform, comes down. So I think the big thing to focus on here is misrepresenting the means, methods of voting. So people, if you say you need an ID to vote and that's not true, that information comes down from Facebook. If you say Democrats vote on Tuesday and Republicans vote on Wednesday, that comes down. If you say you can vote by text, that comes down. So it's thinking about misrepresenting how you can vote, that sort of information comes down. We also take down information that misrepresents qualifications for voting or involves threats about people who might go to vote. So that's sort of the crux of this policy, and you can see the whole policy online. But anything that does violate this policy on Facebook, if reported to us, will come down from the platform. So actionable. How do you report this content for us? Well, starting now through the end of the 2020 election cycle, they'll actually be in the Facebook reporting flow, and every single piece of content on Facebook can be reported. It's the 3-dot button. It looks like an ellipses that's next to every piece of content on Facebook. There'll be an incorrect voting info button. So if you see content that incorrectly represents how you vote here in the state of Oregon, you can report that information directly to Facebook so that we can look at that. On top of that, we've worked with Director Trout and his team, as well as elections directors across the country, to set up a channel that's managed 24/7, where he and his team can report any sort of election misinformation directly to us at Facebook. So you can always also escalate your content to him and his team, and they can send it through to that 24-hour managed channel. I will also give you guys my email address here at the end of the presentation. I sleep for 3 to 4 hours a night, but I'm mostly a 24/7 channel, so you can also report that content directly to me. So just to give you an idea about the 2018 midterms, we removed 45,000 instances of incorrect voting information on Facebook. More than 90% of those were removed before they were reported to us. When people report pieces of content, we can fan out, we can find similar content. We have a bunch of searches running at all times to try to find this information and get it down. So your reports are important and they do really help us, but we're also finding and taking down a lot of that content before it even comes to us. But what about for content that might be misleading or misinformation but doesn't violate that voter misinformation policy? Well, we work with fact-checking partners, third-party journalist organizations, fact-checkers, who can fact-check information on the platform. So Facebook identifies potential misinformation through a variety of signals, and we send that misinformation or that potential misinformation to fact-checkers to review. Fact-checkers can also find information themselves on the platform and choose to review it. They then review the information that comes to them and rate the accuracy. And if the fact checkers rate an article or a piece of information or a video or an image as false on Facebook, we apply some treatments to that, and you can see what happens here. So the first thing that we do is, if information on Facebook is rated as false by one of our third-party fact checkers, we actually demote that content. So it's demoted lower in Facebook's newsfeed, so it's harder to find, it surfaces less often, it becomes less viral. If you try to share content that's been rated as false on Facebook, we give you this little interstitial that I know it's very hard to see on this screen, but it basically says, a third-party fact checker has rated this content as false. Do you want to see that third-party fact checker's article? Are you sure you want to share this? So we will give people, we will still let them share it, but we will give them that interstitial in between. If you had shared this content before a third-party fact checker marked it as false, we would send you a notification and say, hey, Joe, you shared this information that has now been rated as false by a third-party fact checker. Do you want to go back and delete that? Are you sure you wanted to share that? So we'll let you know that. And then if I happen to come across that information that was rated as false in my newsfeed, I'll see this sort of screen over top of it and a related article with that third-party fact-checking article letting me know that that information was rated as false by a third-party fact-checker. So there are sort of two different options there. There's that information that we remove completely that violates our voter misinformation policy, and then also third-party fact-checkers for other content on the platform. So the other objective I really want to talk about here is increasing transparency, and I think that this came up a little bit in the first two presentations. But for anyone who wants to run an ad on Facebook about politics, about social issues, so that sort of fits into those divisive issues that Matt was talking about, or about elections, and that's anything about elections, including sort of general, here's where your polling place is, sort of information about elections, you have to go through an authorizations process to run those ads on Facebook. That authorizations process involves uploading an ID that shows that you are who you claim to be, meaning someone pretending to be someone else on the platform can't run an ad about any of these sensitive topics, and it involves getting a letter with a code sent to a residential mailing address in the United States. So somebody who doesn't have access to a residential mailing address in the United States cannot run ads about social issues, elections, or politics in the United States. And then on top of that, we now put all ads, so all ads run about social issues, elections, and politics in the US have to carry a paid for by disclaimer on them saying who paid for them. They also all go in this publicly available searchable database where they stay for 7 years. So anyone can search anything in this database and see any ad run about these issues. So that involves everything from ads run by candidates in this room to ads run by your elections office if they're running ads, to ads run by Coca-Cola that might have been about a social issue, right, or a political issue. So there are no exceptions to this rule. Everybody who runs ads in this space has to go through this authorizations process. So if you are are a county elections official in the room and you maybe haven't gone through this process yet, I'm going to make sure that you get my email at the end of this presentation. But if you think that you might run ads on Facebook, I would strongly suggest going through the process early, because it does involve getting a literal piece of mail delivered to you. It does not happen overnight. We're trying to keep the post office alive here for you. So go through it early if you think this is something you might do. And also check out this ad library. It's a great way to see what's happening in the state and monitor, what's happening in the political ecosystem and the conversation. So want to switch gears here a little bit to talk about account security, sort of hard account security and things you should be doing if you manage a Facebook page. First thing, make sure you are managing your Facebook pages from real profiles. Matt talked a lot about this, about how Russians and bad actors create fake accounts. They pretend to be somebody else. So a big part of the way that we keep Facebook safe is we shut down fake accounts. We mandate that you only have each person only have one profile that is represented by their real name, right? That you can upload an ID that shows that that profile should belong to you. So make sure that you guys are doing your part in this space and using real profiles represented by your real name, not a profile that is like Office of the County of Smithville, that is then managing the County of Smithville page, using a real profile with a real name to help keep that account safe and secure. Then you want to make sure that all of the Facebook profiles that are admins on your Facebook pages are safe and secure, because that's how people get you on Facebook. They hack your Facebook profile and then they use that to access your government or your campaign Facebook page. So a couple things to think about. The first one, and this is so annoyingly basic, I know, but it is to set strong passwords. Most hacks are not actually hacks, they're just poor password management. So setting a strong password is actually really, really important. There's a link here, fb.me/securitycheckup. If you go to that link, we'll show you and log in with your personal Facebook profile. We'll show you how strong your password is and suggest that you change it if it's not strong. We'll also show you a list of the devices and browsers where you're currently logged into your Facebook account and allow you to log out remotely if you don't have control over any of them. Like if you logged in on a friend's phone, a library computer, something like that, this will allow you to log out remotely. And the last thing that link will help you do is we'll let you turn on login alerts. This will allow you to get a notification every time someone logs into your Facebook account from a device or a browser where it's never been logged into from before, and we'll also send you the notification. So if you get a new iPhone and you're logging into your Facebook app, you'll get a notification that says, somebody in Salem has logged into your iPhone. You know that's you. If you get a notification that says somebody from Nigeria has logged into your Facebook account, that's going to be a great time to immediately change your password and email me, and I will make sure that you get my email address. But you can turn on those alerts so you can see whenever somebody is logging into your Facebook account. And the second thing here is two-factor authentication. I assume most of you know what this is, but for those of you who don't, it basically means every time you log into your Facebook account from a device or browser you never logged into it from before, you have to enter in a second piece of information in addition to your email address and your password. Usually it's a code that gets texted to your phone, but Facebook has a lot of different options you can use in the two-factor authentication space. Please, please, please turn on two-factor authentication. Every time I talk to a government audience, which is all the time, I stand up here and I beg people to turn on two-factor authentication, and they don't listen to me. Usually. Please don't be those people. Please, please turn it on. Every single admin on your page should have two-factor authentication turned on, no exceptions. I've been at Facebook for about 4 years now, and I've dealt with a lot of account hacks. I've never dealt with an account hack where every admin on that page had two-factor authentication turned on. Every time there's a hack, there's always at least one admin that didn't have two-factor authentication turned on. So don't be those people who call me on election night. Please, please, please turn on two-factor authentication and make sure that everybody who you give access to your page to also has two-factor authentication turned on. Please. fb.me/2fa will walk you through how to turn it on. And then finally, want to make a plug here for Facebook Protect. This is our highest level of security with which you can secure your accounts on Facebook. It's for anybody involved in the 2020 election at all. If you go to facebook.com/GPA/Facebook Protect, you can find instructions for how to enroll. But you can actually enroll all of the admins on your page in this program, and it just provides extra screening and monitoring for potential hacks and threats on those accounts. So make sure you check that out, especially if you're a campaign or you're working in government in the election space. Then I want to give you guys some resources here. Facebook.com/GPA is the first part of that website I just gave you. That's a one-stop shop for best practices, including security best practices, if you're someone in the government and politics space. FB.me/security checkup is the link I gave you earlier. That's what you want to send to every admin who has access to your government or political pages to make sure that their account is safe and secure. And then at the bottom there, that's my email address. I'm Eva, that's eguidarini@fb.com. If you're running into any problems, if you're thinking something suspicious is happening with your account, please, please, please reach out to me. If you get a weird email from Facebook and you're not sure if it's from Facebook, send that to me. Don't click on any of the links, and I am always happy to tell you if it's from us or if it's not from us. Don't go clicking on those weird links. But anything you need, shoot me an email. I'm always happy to help. And I think that we finished with enough time that I can take like a couple of questions here before we move on. Does anybody have any? No questions? Well, excellent. Okay, that was easy. Well, thank you all. You have my email address, so if any questions come up afterwards, feel free to shoot me an email, and thanks so much for having me.
All right, everybody. Well, I'm Hannah Kegler. I am from the FBI out in the Portland Division. I'm a supervisory intelligence analyst there. And tonight I'm going to go over some practical cybersecurity measures that you can do to kind of secure your campaigns and your programs, as well as talk a little bit about some tools available through social media that allows you to kind of amplify your voice in that social media sphere. So first I want to start off with just the intelligence community assessment of the Russian 2016 election. So the entire intelligence community got together, and we basically said that Russia viewed the 2016 election interference as a qualified success, and they're going to continue to try to develop tools to be able to use against the United States. Also, the USEC assessed that the day following the election, Russia began a spearfishing. Oh, sorry, of course, yeah. Began a spearfishing campaign against the U.S. government, individuals associated with think tanks, and those non-governmental organizations. So in a nutshell, this is a problem that didn't start in 2016, and it's definitely not ending. Our adversaries are continuing to evolve and try to find new ways to interfere with our election processes. And so it's important for us to do the best that we can in order to kind of harden ourselves as targets against these foreign adversaries. So everybody knows the Podesta email. It's probably the most visual thing that came out of the 2016 election interference. But what most people don't understand is this was initially identified by Mr. Podesta's staff as a potential phishing email. Mr. Podesta sent this to their security team, or his team sent it to the security team to ask for qualification. That security team came back and said, yes, this is a legitimate email. You need to change your password immediately. You need to use two-factor authentication, and you need to use this known good link to where Gmail has you rechange your passwords. Those are all fantastic advice from that security person, and none of it was followed. So Podesta staff went to the original email, they went through that malicious link, and that's how the credentials were compromised. So this is important to kind of point out that 80% is not good enough when we're talking about cybersecurity. It's important that you follow all of the protocols and go through every single step when we're talking about securing our networks, especially in something as simple as phishing. So very quickly, we all kind of know what phishing is. We've talked about it a lot tonight. But it's basically the attempt to obtain credentials and email accounts for illicit purposes. And that can be for spreading malware, it could be stealing data off your computer networks, it could be installing ransomware in which they encrypt your entire systems and demand that you pay money in order to get access to it back. But there are a lot of malicious things that can be done through that simple phishing. And just to give you an idea, in 2018, 91% of cyber attacks started with a phishing email. So this is the way that they get in for all different types of malicious activity. And it's rampant, I guess is the best way to say it. In 2019, about 65% of US businesses had a phishing attack. 88% had a spear phishing attack, which just means that it's tailored to a very specific audience. 83% had phishing, which is really just a new way of saying a phone scam. So basically, they tried to phish credential information from you over the phone. And 84% said smishing, which is SMS phishing over through text. If somebody is asking you for credentialed or password information over a text message, it's probably a scam. Additionally, between 2018 and late 2019, they estimate that there was a 250% increase in phishing attacks targeting organizations operating in a cloud-based email environment. And that basically means Microsoft 365 and G Suite. Those are our two largest cloud-based email environments. So there have been a significant target of phishing attacks. So how are we at protecting our accounts? How good are we doing? There was a security company called Agari that in March of 2019 looked at the top presidential campaigns. So those who were polling greater than 1% at that point in time, and how their campaigns were securing their networks. What they found is that 85% of those campaigns at the time were not even using the basic built-in security protocols in their cloud-based emails, which was primarily, again, Microsoft 365 and Google. Those tools are available for you if you have those accounts. It's simply just a matter, just like Eva was talking about with Facebook, is clicking the button and signing up for those advanced tools. So what can we do to protect our accounts? A lot of this is probably stuff that you've heard before. It's just a matter of reiterating it and making it part of your daily practice. So training your staff. I know that Steve has been working on testing everybody on phishing. That's fantastic. The more that we see it and the more paranoid that we get with phishing, the more we're going to be aware of these types of attacks as they come about. Also, use an external cloud-based service for data storage and email. That is a secure way to do your email, but ensure that those advanced security protections are turned on. And both Google and Microsoft have a special security suite for government that allows you to have even higher protections that are available. Also, separate your personal and campaign-related communications. Try to have a separate email address for each sectors of your life, for a couple different reasons. A, your personal email has a lot of personal stuff in it. You have a lot of PII that would be very valuable to bad actors. We also tend to be a little bit more lax with our personal accounts. So by having a separate campaign or government-related email address that you're using for all your activity, it's going to be a little bit more secure. Also, I'd ask that you review your data retention policy. Everybody kind of has different policies for how long they can keep things. If you're running a 2020 campaign, is it necessary that you keep data from 2016 or from 2008, or all that information? Because the more data that you have on your servers, the more things that you have that can be taken, the more stuff that bad actors potentially have to dig through and use to exploit you if it's exfiltrated, if you're a victim of a cyber attack. Other very simple things, don't save your browsers and passwords. I know it's so easy with Chrome, they throw it out there do you want me to save this password? No. Use a password manager if it's necessary for you to keep a bunch of very complicated passwords. Also, there's a lot of really great communication apps that are available that have encryption. So consider using encryption for very sensitive communications with your campaign teams. Signal, Wickr, WhatsApp, all of those have peer-to-peer encryption and are readily available for everybody. So one tool that we can use is called DMARC. Again, that same security company in March 2019 looked at those top presidential candidates and found that only 31% of them were using the DMARC protocol. What DMARC allows you to do is if you own your own domain, it makes sure that you are who you say you are when you send things from your domain. So this prevents people from being able to send, phishing emails to all your constituents, from being able to spread disinformation by acting like you. It's just another security protocol that exists if you own your own domain for domain management. Eva just talked about two-factor authentication, but I would go a little bit farther and say for your email accounts or anything that you need to keep secure, multi-factor authentication is a must, right? Two-factor authentication is very vulnerable to a thing called SIM swap. So Princeton last month released this great study where they simply just called all 5 US telecommunication companies and said, hey, I lost my phone, I have a new SIM card, can you go ahead and switch all my data off to this new SIM card? And all 5 companies fell for it. So it's really easy to get what is on your phone sent to somebody else. So by having a multi-factor authentication where you're using a token or some other type of authenticator, it really helps you secure that account. One last thing I'll say for protecting users' accounts is evaluate your role-based access. So does everybody in your organization need the same access to your accounts? Or are there some people who you can kind of restrict what they have access to within your networks? And there's some people that you would designate as administrators that have kind of free reign to do what they need within your networks. So next I'm going to talk about devices. This is a huge part of what we do. In a perfect world, we would say, okay, every campaign needs to provide campaign phones for everybody on their staff. But we know that is neither feasible nor is it practical. So if you are allowing people that work in your office or on your campaigns to use their own device, I would recommend that you would review a detailed bring your own device policy. And there's a couple things that you can kind of include in this in varying levels of tiers depending on the type of employee that you're dealing with and the level of sensitive information that they have. So kind of for everybody, it's just a matter of what happens post-campaign. Come December, what happens to all those files and details and information that they have on their tablets, phones, and computers? Are they going to archive it? Are they going to delete it? Are they allowed to keep it? What is the plan? Also outline what types of apps and accounts are approved for campaign-related conversations. This is just so that you can kind of keep control over how things are communicated and prevent things like people using foreign-based applications to have conversations that are sensitive to your campaign. If we lay all that out in a BYOD, it prevents those types of problems from coming up. Another thing that could be open for everybody is an emphasis on keeping direct physical control of all your devices and remotely wiping all lost devices. That should be something that's kind of understood for everybody that works with you, because if a bad actor can get their hands on that device, there's maybe a lot of sensitive information that they're able to take off. Now for your mid-level range on a BYOD policy is installing an endpoint protection, which basically just makes sure that when your cell phone touches your networks, that it's safe, that it's kosher, that everything's updated on that security, that there's no malware that it's bringing in, and it kind of keeps your overall network safe. For your most restrictive policy for a BYOD is installing something called a mobile device management software, which allows you to monitor all the different devices. You can require that people keep their devices encrypted. There's a lot of commercially available tools like BitLocker or FileLock. Or you can go all in and use an advanced protective services like CrowdStrike or Mandiant. Those are ones that do basically nuts and bolts secure network security from your devices to your phones to your email. They kind of handle everything. So for looking at your networks, the one thing I cannot emphasize enough is regular backups. And what I mean by this is not your OneDrive or your Google Drive, but actually having a completely disconnected backup of your system that is what we call a known good. So on this date, at this time, we know that our system was not infected with anything, and we are just going to take it and basically put it on a shelf. It's not connected to our regular network, there's no ties to it, and that if something goes wrong with something goes wrong with the network that I have in front of me, I have this backup here that I can then restore to that date. This is very important if you get hit with something like a ransomware, because ransomware will not only infect your system, but if you're tied to a cloud that has a regular communication, it will also affect everything that is in your cloud. So it's very important to have a backup with the last known good. Some other network things that you've probably heard before is to create a guest Wi-Fi for anybody coming in and out, that you can keep your own personal network secure, and try to avoid public Wi-Fi services or use a VPN when possible when you're on the road. Also, very simple things of using a secure browser, such as Chrome or Firefox, not using any unknown USB or chargers, especially when you're traveling in the airport. Bring your own stuff or get a really great battery backup. And the most important is just creating a culture of security through every level of your organization, all the way from either your candidate or your director, all the way down to the people that are knocking on doors. That it's important that everybody plays a very significant role in contributing to the cybersecurity within your organization. One thing I would like to mention is a nonprofit called Defending Digital Campaigns. So last summer, the FEC approved this nonprofit to work with a bunch of partner agencies to provide free cybersecurity assistance to federal campaigns and national parties. Now, I would say that for those who are state and local campaigns, some of these companies are also offering resources at that level. So if there's a company on here that you're interested in, I know Microsoft, for example, has some tools that are available. I'd still recommend that you reach out to this if you're interested to see what they could offer you, because there are a lot of that would be normally very expensive cybersecurity elements that they're offering for free in order to help with this disinformation issue. So protecting online campaigns. Luckily, Sam and Matt have kind of set this up perfectly. They talked a lot about how these disinformation campaigns work and what we've seen. I'm going to talk about some very practical, easy, free tools that we can use to kind of look at this. So as we said earlier, the disinformation is all about amplifying message, spreading discord, and disillusioning voters, right? So our job should be amplifying our message, not countering the discord, but being able to put forth a narrative and empowering our voters. So the first bullet that I have there is actually from the same MIT study that Sam mentioned. So falsehood spread farther, faster, and deeper, and more broadly than the truth, 6 times, like she said. But it spreads even faster when that falsehood is about political issues. So that's very important to know when we are messaging ourselves, and if we're sending out media or if we're sharing memes, we need to understand that if we put something out there that's false, it's going to be a lot harder to take back. So there's a couple of resources that I have here to do some fact-checking on your own. Factcheck.org is a nonprofit, and they keep track of a lot of rumors and memes that are kind of spreading out on the social media sphere. Newstrition and Trusted Time are both browser extensions. So you can put them on your Chrome or Firefox browser, and as you're looking at the news, they kind of like pop up in your upper right-hand corner, and they'll tell you all kinds of interesting things. They'll tell you what they know about the source, what type of stories that news source puts out. They'll tell you whether there's a bias one way or the other. And Nutrition will even provide fact-checking through Snopes or PolitiFact if it's available. So it's a really easy way to just let yourself be informed about the sources of information that you're putting out. So knowing the online environment is very important to know how your message is successfully being spread out through the social media sphere. So it's important for you to know as your campaign, what's trending, what are people saying, what are your followers sharing, who are your influencers. Like Sam talked about earlier, you want to know who are your accelerators when you're sending out your information. And it's important to go beyond Facebook and Twitter. Those are the two that we talk about the most, especially Twitter. And I'll admit, all the tools that I talk about from this point on are all Twitter-based because Twitter's API is publicly available. So there's a lot of things that you can do with it. But the Russian interference in 2016 hit it all. I mean, they even sold merch on PayPal. So all of these different social media have the ability to be used by malicious actors to spread malign foreign influence. So it's very important that you work with those different social media platforms to identify hoax accounts, fake invites, and disinformation. I mean, you saw in Eva's presentation, Facebook has a lot of tools that are available to counter this, and a lot of the other different social media platforms are building the same type of capabilities. So what I'm going to talk about is how you can look at, there are a couple different ways that you can look at your social media footprint and figure out different ways on where you need to amplify your message or how you can kind of expand your social media footprint. So I have 4 resources listed here. I'm only going to go through the top 2, which are TweetDeck and Awesome. Hootsuite and RivalIQ are really great commercially available social media analytics that are cross-programmatic. So they cover multiple campaigns and do a lot of wonderful things. Because they cost money, I did not look at them as a federal employee. So I'll talk about TweetDeck and Awesome because those are the 2 that I deal with quite a bit. And it's important for you to kind of know this because being able to know what your footprint is allows you to exert control over it and direct it in one way or another. And this is how you can counter disinformation and amplifying messages in the right way that makes it very effective. Of course, I messed this up. There we go. So TweetDeck is a free tool that looks at Twitter, and it does a couple different things. It allows you to manage multiple Twitter accounts at once. But it also allows you to to set up specific search terms and watch things come in real time. This is great if you have something where you want to stay on top of it. So if you're planning a rally, or if you're releasing information that you're expecting to garner a lot of attention, or if it's election night, like this is a great tool to kind of watch things come in. And I have a couple different searches set up, and this one as an example. So the first one is mentions. So anytime that @FBI Portland is mentioned, it captures that tweet and comes up in my feed. The second one is a hashtag, so hashtag FBI Portland. Same thing, it captures it and comes through my feed. The third one, I did a free text, which is I did hashtag Oregon plus the word election. So when those are combined together, it will capture that tweet. And like I said, it's just updating in real time. It's not true analytics, but it's letting you know what people are saying out there in the tweetverse. And all you really need for this is a Twitter account. Personally, I use this every day for my regular job. The next suite of tools I'm going to talk about really briefly is called Awesome. I know it's not spelled that way, but they claim that's how it's pronounced. This is all developed by the University of Indiana. So they've spent a lot of time since 2016 trying to develop a series of tools to counter disinformation. Now, a lot of these are still in beta testing mode, and if you're feeling really wily, you can join their beta test and test out some of these tools. But the ones I'm going to talk about for this portion is their Networks tool. Networks is really fascinating, and you can really go down a lot of rabbit holes. But essentially, what this one does is it shows your retweets and mentions. So I used Iowa Caucus, because obviously a lot of people are talking about it right now. If you see everything in the orange there are people who tweeted and used the hashtag Iowa Caucus. So it's everybody that you would kind of expect. We see Andrew Yang, Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg. Those are all people who are tweeting out with that hashtag. So we're seeing how that hashtag is kind of being spread out in the sphere. So if you and your campaign have a very specific hashtag or an original one, you can search for it for any 30-day period and see how successful that was in spreading out along social media. The blue that you see are retweets. So, Bernie Sanders, who, by looking at this very closely, had the most tweets with this hashtag. You can see how many times his use of that hashtag was retweeted. Again, it's just showing how successful your hashtags are within that 30-day period. The other thing that you can do within the Networks one is look at concurrence. And this is kind of a mess because it is Iowa Caucus, so there was a lot. But basically, it's showing if you have a hashtag, what other hashtags are being used with it. So this is great if you're developing a social media campaign and you kind of want to know how to expand your footprint. You can kind of see what other hashtags people are associating with you, and then you can add those to yours as you do your future posts. If you click on any one of these, it'll tell you what the concurrences are measuring. So this is a concurrence of Iowa Caucus and Iowa Caucuses. And you can see in the background, all the dark lines are showing all the tweets that have both of those hashtags. So it's just another interesting tool to kind of see how successful you're being in social media. The next thing I'm going to briefly talk about is bots, since Sam covered a lot of this. Bots are essentially neutral. They do whatever they're kind of created to do. And they found in that MIT study that bots spread information, spread true information just as fast as false information. They really have no value judgment. The reason why false information spreads so quickly is because of humans, because we spread that information. So it's important when you're doing your analysis, it doesn't matter how many bots you have in your Twitter feed, everybody has bots. The FBI Portland, we have a bot in our Twitter followers that just shares cyber information to a cyber feed. Everybody has bots. It's a matter of what type of information that they're sharing and whether their acceleration is benefiting your message or not. Those are the two things that you need to be concerned with. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is Hoaxy. It's another one of the awesome tools. It allows you to search any free text that you want, and it will look at a 7-day period on how much that's mentioned. So for this one, again, I searched Iowa Caucus win, and you can see little different communication nodes of people that are talking about that and then mentioning and retweeting each other and kind of in their little communication bubble. Also on the right-hand side, it'll tell you whether that individual or that account is more bot-like, if it's closer to red, or more human-like, if it's closer to blue. So luckily, for the Twitterverse, most of these tend to be more human-like, except for this little guy here. that looks like not only does it have a bot-like center, but there seems to be a lot of bot-like people in that little center. So if you click on that center dot, it comes up with that account. So this account, a Jolly Cat, they're assessing that it's about a 3.8 out of 5, potentially a bot. You can click on where it says @JollyCat, and it will take you to that actual Twitter account, so you can see the types of information that they're tweeting. You can also go to Botometer, which is attached to this. Again, another awesome product. And it will bring up their little profile. And besides the fact that they're only tweeting it Tuesday at 11 o'clock, which is weird, you can see here that the recent tweets is 6,900, and they have a retweet rate of 95%. Now, that is way higher than what you would consider for a normal human being. So this account is most likely automated in some way, shape, or form. Either it's a human that's supported by a bot, or it is a bot. Now, what I would do is I would take this information and hop over to another cool tool called Sentinel. Oh, my apologies. So Botometer, one other thing that they will do is they'll search the followers. So if you put in a Twitter handle and say search followers, it'll go through all that person's followers and tell you whether their followers are bots or not. So same thing, if it's closer to red, it's likely a bot. If it's closer to blue, then it's likely a human. But this person also has a couple questionable folks in this little selection of their followers. So if you go over to Bot Sentinel, which is another tool, it too says that this individual is likely automated, that they're a troll bot, 78%, very alarming. But they have a very interesting tool called a troll bot network. So you can put any Twitter name into their troll bot network, and it will tell you if that Twitter name has been identified in connection with other trolls. So I put Jolly Cat in there, and you can see it in the corner. Jolly Cat has a very large network of trolls that it's communicating. So when we're talking about accelerators, this person is tweeting 6,900 tweets a week at a 95% retweet rate. They are sending it out to 25 bots who are probably have very similar retweet rates and are probably doing very similar amount of tweets, who are then probably sending it out to other bots. So that acceleration of information is way faster than it would be through a normal social network. So again, it would be important if you see this type of activity within your own social media footprint to evaluate the type of information that's going out and determine whether this is amplifying your message or not. Also working with Twitter to shut down these bots. Twitter's great at putting them in purgatory and being able to shut down a lot of these bots very quickly. So the main thing that people always want to know is, like, when do I report to FBI? Why does FBI care? They're showing me a bunch of cool tools. Doesn't really seem to have a law enforcement angle. Well, for us, the thing that we're most interested in is if your campaign accounts or emails are compromised through phishing or social engineering, that's when the FBI would be interested. If any of your online users are inciting any kind of violence, or if they're sharing information that may have been obtained through illegal means, including a social engineering attack or a phishing attack, that is definitely in the FBI's purview. If you are a victim of ransomware or any other cyber attack that touches any part of the election infrastructure, both the FBI and DHS are very interested in that information and is definitely our purview. So just in summary, like the two things that I'd like you to take away is really just holistically look at your cyber accounts, your cybersecurity, and figure out, are you as resilient as you need to be? We've all kind of heard the things that we need to do, that we should be doing. Are your accounts where they could be? Are you really toughening yourself against the eventuality of a phishing attack? Because if we look at the numbers, eventually some of these are going to get through. So are you as resilient as you should be? And just the understanding that just with a little bit of monitoring, all those tools that I showed you on your social media, it took me all of maybe 6 minutes. With just a little bit of monitoring, you can really control your social media sphere. You can amplify truth and the messaging for your campaign and really do your part and take responsibility for countering disinformation. And that's all I have. Next, we're going to have Teresa up from CISA.
Well, good evening, everyone. I know it's getting late in the day, so I won't take too long, but I do want to focus a little bit on partnering. I'm from the Department of Homeland Security, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. And we've heard a lot about partnering, and we know that it takes a village, right? It takes at the local level, the state level, and the federal level. And I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing at the federal level, some of the services that we have available, and want folks to take advantage of this. As has been mentioned before, election security is a #1 priority for the Department of Homeland Security. Also, we have a top 3, election security, water, and energy. So you're in good company, and these are things that affect every single American, and we want folks to know that the federal government cares about this. We want to be involved with you, and we want to help however we can. So just to give you a little bit of an overview of our vision is to ensure that we are secure and resilient infrastructure, critical infrastructure, which elections are, for the American people. That's what matters at the end of the day, and I know that all of you are aware of that, so I'm preaching to the choir. And we want to lead the nation's effort to understand and manage risk to our critical infrastructure. Because at the end of the day, that's what's really important, is to understand what our risk is so we can put in appropriate security and controls. There are 16 critical infrastructure sectors. I'm not going to go into this because it's been mentioned that election security is one of those. But we're concerned about all of these. We want to identify where the risks are. We want to partner, and we want to build resilience for all of these areas. So cybersecurity resilience, we define resilience as the ability to prepare and adapt for changing conditions. And several of the speakers tonight have talked about this isn't an area that's stagnant. We're going to continue to see more and more sophisticated attacks. Everybody is a target, personally or within your organizations. It doesn't matter how big you are, how small you are. It doesn't matter where you're located. Everybody is a target, and we need to take this seriously. And I think particularly for some of the smaller organizations, they think, well, nobody really cares about me. I'm out, wherever. They do care about you. They care about everybody. And you can be attacked. So it's really important to think about the security measures that have been talked about tonight and seriously think about implementing them within your organizations, because I can't really emphasize that enough. We see that over and over again in the media. And sometimes we only see about the big attacks that happen on some of the larger organizations, but there's lots and lots of folks that are affected by ransomware and malware, et cetera, and it happens. It happens to everybody. One of the things I do want to share with you is that when the federal government works with your organizations, we take your critical information very, very seriously, and we do not share it. So I know some folks are aware of that. What happens, when I give it to the federal government, who are they going to share it with? We don't share it. And you can feel assured that it's not going to be released publicly. It won't be released in the state, local, or territorial laws or civil litigation, and it won't be used for regulatory purposes. So I really want to emphasize this. If you're concerned about having any of the services that we provide come to your organization, we really take this very, very seriously. So our mission, and this is under election security, of course, is to lead the nation's effort to understand and manage risk to our critical infrastructure. American elections must be decided exclusively by Americans. And we share that, as I know you do, at the local level, at the state level. As I hope you know, the feds take this very, very seriously. We feel that we're in this as much as you are, and we want to help wherever we can. So the focus is on supporting state and local officials run the elections, and the political campaigns that participate in elections to ensure that Americans can cast their vote with a really strong level of confidence. And how are we doing this at the federal level? We're providing free services, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of these services, to election officials and political organizations to empower them to secure their system and build resilience. We're pushing timely and actionable threat information to state and local government offices, and we've talked a little bit about some of this earlier today, so that you can take defensive steps, all of the good security controls that Sam has talked about and Hannah was talking about and others have talked about at Facebook, you really need to take this seriously and do something about it, because that's the only way that we're going to help raise all of our security as we go through this. And engaging the American public to build their understanding and resistance to disinformation. I'm not going to go into that because we've talked about it fairly substantially tonight, but it's really important for them to have a level of confidence in our systems. And I know that all of you are working really hard on doing that. And I want to thank you for your efforts, because I know it's not easy and it's ongoing. It never stops. Some of the facts about the work we are doing: we are working with all 50 states, over 2,400 localities, all the 4 territories, providing information, et cetera. We've deployed intrusion detection, and I think Steve talked a little bit about this. The counties here are using some of these. It gives us a visibility, and this is really important at the federal level, to have visibility, to be working with all of the states. When we talk about information sharing, at the end of the day, the feds are gathering all of this information and sharing it as quickly as possible out with all of you and with all of the states. That's what's really important at the end of the day, is sharing information. So if you see something, say something. Hopefully you've heard that motto before. It's really important to get that information out there, and the feds are acquiring all of this information and sharing it back out when we see anything that looks like it may have a ripple effect. So don't ever think that anything is too small. We would rather hear about it and take action if we need to, as opposed to not hearing about it, and then it can escalate into something that can have a really strong effect on many organizations. So this level of coordination and information sharing means targeted attacks on election infrastructure. Hopefully we're going to be able to detect them a lot sooner. And as I said, I know that Steve has taken a lot of precautions, and I really appreciate that from the federal level, to see that, that's happening at the state, and all of you are taking advantage of that. So more than a quarter of the federal CISO workforce are supporting the security mission in 2018, and there's a whole lot more of us that are working on this with state and local governments as we move forward with Protect 2020. We provide threat briefings to all the presidential campaigns and representatives of both all the parties, and actively working with many of them to identify vulnerabilities and secure their systems. So whether you're a county elections clerk or whether you're working with a campaign, we care about what you're doing, and we really want to help. So with all this progress that we've been making, there's still a lot we can do, and we've talked about, many of the speakers have talked about this tonight. We need to continue investing in our democracy at all levels of government and prioritize our resources for elections, because we hope that we can buy down the risk if we start to upgrade our systems, if we're ensuring that all votes are auditable and providing hands-on IT support, that all campaigns need to prioritize their basic hygiene, and there's been a lot of discussion about how you can do that. Take advantage of it is really, really important. Train your staff on phishing, and Steve's doing an excellent job of that. I'm glad to hear that, because it's really, really important. As Hannah mentioned also, phishing is the easiest way in. Bad guys use it because it works. And so we need to be cognizant of that, and we need to be able to recognize phishing emails, and your staff need to be able to do that so that you don't end up with an issue and an incident that you really don't want to deal with. So here are some services. I'm the cybersecurity advisor for Region 10. There are 10 regions across the country. We align with the FEMA regions. So those regions for the states that are part of Region 10 are Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington State. So there are 2 cybersecurity advisors for those 4 states, and I'm one of them, fairly new. So we have a number of things that we do. We evaluate critical infrastructure risk. We're trying to promote folks working together, initiating, building capacity, helping to educate and raise awareness. We listen to our stakeholders. We really do care about what you have to say, and if there's things that we can do better at the federal level, we want to know about it, and try to bring folks together from across the country, as well as at the state level and at the county level. So here are some of the services that we offer, and I've got some handouts that I've put over on the table if you want to take advantage of them. We have a number of cyber resilience assessments that we do, and I want to emphasize all of these are free. your tax dollars at work. All of these are free, and I really, really encourage all of you to take advantage, whether you're at the county level or at the state level, to take advantage of these. We have cyber infrastructure surveys. We have a cyber evaluation tool. We have a lot of education and awareness. We have phishing campaigns. I know that Steve has got one already in progress here, but we have a phishing campaign that we can help implement for you. We do tabletop exercises. There was just, and again, Steve mentioned this, the EISAC, the Elections Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center, has pushed out, and there was just one that came out today. Hopefully all of you are members of the EISAC and you're receiving their alerts and messages on an ongoing basis. CISA just put out an elections tabletop exercise package that you can take advantage of. We're also, of course, encouraging folks to have disaster recovery plans because anybody can have an incident. So what's really important is that you're able to recover as quickly as possible. We have penetration testing that we do, vulnerability scanning, validated architecture. We do network and vulnerability assessments. We also have federal virtual training environment, and there's hundreds of security courses. And if you have a .gov email address, you or your folks can take advantage of this. And hopefully you've all heard of the Stop, Think, Connect campaign that's been around for several years. And again, we encourage you to take advantage of that. So here's my contact information. As I said, I want to thank all of you. On behalf of CISA for all the hard work that you do. We really appreciate it, and we want to be there as good partners to help you in any way that we can. Thank you. And now, Shannon Marheen.
Good evening. Okay, I'm keenly aware that I stand between you and the exit, so it's going to be pretty brief, this presentation. If Teresa would give me the... Clicker, you can click for me if you want. I know we're really great partners. Thank you. Okay. Good evening again. Shannon Marhine. I manage the Intel Center at the Oregon Department of Justice Criminal Justice Division, which houses the Oregon Titan Fusion Center. I'm going to give you a really brief overview of the Fusion Center and then give you some list of resources for us so we can move on about our evening. The Fusion Centers were created in response to the 9/11 Commission report, saw a need for increased information sharing amongst local, state, and federal entities. There are 80 across the national network of fusions, including the Oregon Titan Fusion Center. Our mission is pretty simple: to promote the sharing of intelligence information between state, local, and federal partners. We've kind of enhanced that mission over the last year to include private sector partners within critical infrastructure sectors like the elections infrastructure sector. Already talked about that. Let's see, I'm going to speed through it really quick for you guys. So Teresa already stole my see something, say something thunder. I know you all heard of that before. We take that very seriously at the Fusion Center. We have services that we can help provide to your staff to inform what they should be reporting on. They should be reporting locally. Your local law enforcement entities kind of push that up to us where we take a look at it, trend it, and then work with our partners at FBI to make sure it gets to the appropriate agencies. We also provide some more investigative services. I'm going to pass right past that and go straight to what's important to you. So special events operations. In the Fusion Center, we have the ability to help coordinate information flow during a special event for you all, for our federal partners. And one of those examples would be elections. During one of the last election events, we opened what's called the Sit-Aware Room. It's a virtual room on a platform called Homeland Security Information Network. It's a secure portal that allows us to open it up virtually to our partners so we can share information. We will open that up for law enforcement, like you would imagine, who we primarily support, but we also open an FOUO version for folks like yourselves who have a mission that doesn't have to do with necessarily law enforcement, but you have a need for information sharing. At the same time, we'll open a national room where we can share information with our local partners on what's going on in other cities. The other thing we can do for special events, I'm looking at my little note. I'm so short, I can barely see it, so I apologize, you guys. So the other product we can do when it comes to special events is we can provide threat-based intelligence products, threat assessments, things like that to help you plan for the security of your event, whether it's specific to a forum like the Salem Convention Center, or if it's specific to an event that you have every year, we can help you plan for that. So I think at least 2 of our presenters tonight mentioned that the elections infrastructure sector is officially a sector in the 16. We work really hard to coordinate with the other critical infrastructure owner operators in Oregon in those 16 sectors. So aside from you guys here tonight and the EI ISAC that was mentioned a few times, we have 15 other ISACs that we monitor. So it keeps us really busy. The benefit of having that at a focal point in the state like the Fusion Center is that we can bring those together. So if we're seeing trends in one sector that you depend on as an elections infrastructure sector, we can share that information with you. This is your take-home slide, really quickly. For your purposes tonight, I want you to think about your staff, your teams, your mission area. Do you have someone that's connected in with the Oregon Titan Fusion Center? Have you even ever heard of it before? If you haven't, please take a look. I'm going to have contact information at the end. Please contact us if you're interested in being a partner. We want to make sure that you get as much information as you possibly can from us when it comes to sharing threat information that we get from partners like Teresa, who spoke earlier, Chas, who's our PSA, I'm sure he's in the room still. Chas, raise your hand. Right? And of course, Director Trout and his team. So this is a really great resource that we have in the state. The other piece of that is, I already talked about special events a little bit. If you have something in your community aside from elections, which I know that's our focal point tonight, please share the word with your teams that we can help with those. We can help with the planning. Now this is probably the most important one. This is our contact for our Fusion Center. Please reach out to us. Let us know if we can help you get connected. We have resources for training on suspicious activity, as I mentioned earlier. We have resources in the way of a cybersecurity committee that has templates to work on cyber incident response plans, emergency operation plans, those kind of things that people are already doing. We're trying to take the best of those and share them with the community. That's it. See, I told you I'd be fast, I promised. Thank you.
All right, folks. It has been an information-filled evening. And out of respect for your time, we will go ahead and close the symposium. So thank you for being here. We will stay around for questions. If anybody has questions, we'll take them in this forum, and we'll also stick around for individual questions if there are no questions. But I understand we're over time, and so if you have someplace you need to be, please feel free to stand up and head on with your evening. Thank you all for being here, and we'll take questions.